Hi everyone, I'm Donna Stellhorn, your practical astrologer, and today I am answering some astrology questions. So a man named Bobby wrote me through the comments and gave me a whole list of questions, and they were such interesting questions that I thought I would answer them in a video. Now, just to clarify, I do tropical Western astrology, and I consider myself a modern astrologer, and so that's going to shift some of my answers a little bit. If you like videos like this, hit the like button, and if you have astrology questions, then put them into the comments and I could make a video about your question. All right, question number 1. If the sun is a star and the moon is a star, why do astrologers keep calling them planets? So the answer is, we astrologers know that they are not planets, that they're actually luminaries. But personally, I'm lazy, and so I say planet because luminary has more syllables, and to say planets and luminaries every time takes up a lot of time. So I'm lazy. Question number 2. So I'm going to paraphrase his question. And so he says that the sun is about 380 times farther away from the Earth compared to the moon. So if we can assume that the moon was 1 kilometer away from the Earth, then that would make the sun 380 kilometers away from the Earth. That all makes sense. So he's asking how the sun's orbit then would intersect with the moon for calculating Rahu and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu are terms for the North Node and South Node. And so because Rahu and Ketu, or North Node and South Node, are intersecting points between the sun's and moon orbit, how can this happen? So North Node and South Node, or Rahu and Ketu, are sensitive points in the chart. I work with the moon's nodes, but actually every planet can have nodes. But the moon's nodes are the most famous, North Node and South Node. So now, nodes are any pair of points that mark the intersection between two planetary orbits. And I just said planetary. This will include luminaries. So the nodes of the moon, North Node and South Node, are the intersection between the moon's orbit and the ecliptic. So the ecliptic is the sun's apparent path around the Earth. So if we pretend for a moment that the Earth is stationary and we watch the sun cross in the sky, that imaginary line that it's drawing on the Earth is the ecliptic. And then we have the line that the moon is making in its orbit, and where those two cross is the nodes. The nodes themselves actually represent a range of possible positions. So this is considered a 4-dimensional aspect. And so that's why sometimes you'll see a mean node used. This is the average of that range of possible positions. For instance, use the true node. I find that more accurate, but if you see mean node, that's what they're doing. They're taking the average of the possible positions. I'm taking the actual position. So why is this important? Well, the North Node and South Node are really useful for predictions because they can pinpoint really important events in our lives that we're going to be emotionally sensitive to. And so the nodes are great for prediction. Question number 3. Why is the Earth, which he accurately says is an actual planet, not considered in the birth chart? Well, the type of astrology that I practice, which most astrologers practice, is geocentric astrology. And that means that we are standing on the Earth, looking at the heavens, and so we are not seeing the Earth because we're standing on it. The Earth actually does appear in the chart. Well, it doesn't appear. The Earth is actually there in the chart. It is exactly opposite the position of the sun. So if you were, say, 5 degrees of Taurus, that's your sun sign, then your Earth is 5 degrees of Scorpio. If your sun sign is 20 degrees of Capricorn, your Earth is 20 degrees of Cancer. There's actually another branch of astrology called heliocentric astrology, which is actually quite useful when you are looking about when you're going to move. And that is as though we are standing on the sun, and then the Earth is in the chart, but everything is done from the vantage point of the sun. And so the planets are in completely different places because of that different vantage point. Question number 4. Since Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Mercury, Venus are extremely far away from the Earth and have no gravitational, magnetic, or radiation, or their own light, how can that affect humans on Earth? How can it have any effect on our lives? Well, I did a video talking about this already, but and while all of us astrologers have theories, we really actually don't know. And I know that not knowing bothers some people, but there's actually a lot of things that we do in our lives where we can utilize the tools that it provides without knowing exactly why it works. I don't think there's anybody out there who thinks that we know everything about the human body and how it works and how to heal. And so everybody is still okay that we are progressing in this area, that we are learning every day. And so the fact that we don't know how or why astrology works doesn't necessarily mean we can't work with it and use it. The same goes for gravity. When I was a kid in school, the theory was that there were these things called gravitons that attached to the person and pulled them to the Earth, and people and objects and all of that. But now it seems that the theory is that space is curved and that we're not really falling, but we're just kind of sliding into this space that has a heavier mass. So we're still learning why it works, but it does work, and so I think we can use it. I think someday that physicists and philosophers will come together and explain all of these mysteries of the universe. But in the meantime, I think that we can continue to use this and learn about it and grow with it. And one day, maybe we'll be lucky and we'll know why it works. Question 5. Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Venus have their own natural satellites. So why do astrologers not consider any of the effects of these satellites on our lives? Our solar system also has asteroids, meteorites. Why do astrologers not consider these? Well, the answer is some astrologers do. In fact, I have many books on this subject. It's partly is that there are so many things to choose from, to focus on in astrology, that it's sometimes necessary to limit the scope just because it can get overwhelming. There is so much information out there. And some of it is because astrology has been around for thousands of years, so that's a lot of collected information. I have books on these shelves that are translations of books that are 1,000 years old, and I have books that were published last year. Like, we're still growing and learning. But if you feel drawn to asteroids, the meteorites, the satellites of different planets, there's information about it, and those do have meaning. Question 6. Which is the correct birth time of a child? Is it when the mouth of the child comes out of the mother's body? Is it when the whole child comes out of the mother's body? Is it when the child cries for the first time? Is it when the umbilical cord between the child and mother is cut? Or is it when the zygote is formed in the mother's body where there's a union of sperm and egg? So, in my opinion, it is the child's first breath. That is the old idea of the spirit has now entered the body, the soul has now entered the body, and that's the union. So, but that's my opinion, and other astrologers may have a differing opinion. Question 7. How could astrologers predict by seeing a horoscope that the native is male, female, or transgender? So, in short, you can't. And that's what I'm saying. Again, maybe some astrologers will disagree with me. Now, there are some astrologers who may try to predict the gender of a child based on the polarity of certain aspects. So we might look at planets in the 5th house and say, well, these are mostly male in polarity, and so maybe you're tending towards a male child. Or you might say, well, there's Cancer on the 5th house, and Cancer is female, but the moon is in Gemini, and Gemini is male, but Mercury is in Virgo, which is female, so we can go back and forth. But we really cannot see from just a chart whether the person is male, female, or somewhere in between. And we can't see race, we can't see religion, we can't see politics. And it's possible that these are just things that we do on the earth to separate people, that we don't necessarily need them, or that those divisions are artificial in some way. Again, that's just my opinion. But I've never met an astrologer who could predict gender from just looking at a chart. Question 8. How could astrologers predict by seeing the horoscope that the native is already dead, or if they're still alive? Again, I'm going to say I cannot do that, nor do I know any astrologers who can. The chart itself doesn't tell us that the person is alive or dead, unless we can see indications in the chart that the chart is really old. I mean, if the chart shows Pluto in Aries, that person's not alive because, nobody lives that long. So, but on a related note, which is really, really interesting, is after we pass, your astrology chart is still active. And so when transits come and hit it, after you've passed, that's the time where relatives may come together to talk about you, or you might be in the news or something like that. So after my husband passed away, I watched the chart for many years and watch as transits hit his chart. That would be the day that an old colleague would call and say they missed him, or somebody, like an old college buddy would call looking for him. And so the chart itself lives on. Question 9, I'm going to put it on the screen. It's a long question, and it has to do with the dignities of planets. And so this is something in traditional astrology which said that planets in certain signs were less happy or less effective or had less energy than other signs. Now, I practice modern astrology, so I don't actually use this. In my estimation, there are good points and bad points for any position. So the planets can be in any sign. There's going to be some good news. There's going to be some bad news. That's just, to me, that's life. Question number 10, I'm going to put that on the screen also. That is a little bit about dignities. But there is something that I did want to point out. And so what they're referring to when they say a person might be fair or dark is in relation to siblings, not in relation to everyone around you. And so, for example, Libra tends towards fair, whereas Scorpio would tend towards dark. And so that might mean that, you get all your siblings have blue or gray eyes, but you have brown eyes, but you're the Scorpio rising. I did a video recently on how rising signs can affect appearance. Of course, the sun and moon sign can also affect appearance, but if you're interested, I can do more videos on this in the future. Just leave me a comment. Question 11, it's a long question, so I'm going to put that on the screen, but this is about combust planets. So combust means that a planet sits very close to the sun, and in traditional astrology, this was not considered lucky. However, in modern astrology, we don't consider it that. Again, it has some pluses and it has some minuses. And so the plus is that any sort of conjunction is kind of like being Siamese twins. So if you're Siamese twins with the sun, which is, the luminary, your talents, your abilities, your ability to shine, literally. And as Bobby points out, we see a lot of famous people who have a planet combusts the sun. And that makes sense because that's giving more energy to the sun. It makes their light shine brighter. So, of course, it depends on the planet. And there's quite a few people have Mercury conjunct Sun, which can mean that the person is really out there for periods of time. You know, they start to speak and we all turn to listen. It's you know, because they're good at that. But the sun, there is a side of that where sometimes the sun gets too bright and the Mercury gets obscured and the person disappears for a while and we don't see them and we say, where did they go? So Mercury conjunct Sun is probably the most common of these. When it's a slower moving planet like Pluto conjunct Sun, that person walks in the room and all heads turn. Everybody notices that person. They have enormous power. Now, how they use that power, or you know, who do they associate with who might take that power and use it for their own aims, or try to squash that power, or who encourage that power and lift that person up, you know, that's all the choices that the individual is making with who they associate with and how they use their power. But Sun-Pluto would be a very powerful combination. Whereas Sun-Saturn would be much more reserved than the reserve of Saturn, and the wanting to be perfect and the wanting to not ruffle any feathers and to make sure that everyone is okay with them. That person would step very cautiously. But when they do, they would be stepping in the perfect steps. They would be, because they have thought it through, they would bring the finished product, not some sort of half-baked ideas. They would be saying, you know, I'm going to do this as perfectly as I can. Now, if a person comes to me with Sun, Saturn, I'm not going to recommend that they do that. Perfectionism can stop us from a lot of things. This may be something they need to overcome, but that's going to be the tendency. And that's it. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have a question about astrology, leave it in the comments and I could do a video on it.